Yeah. Hello and welcome back to the Retail Podcast. And I'm really excited to have someone on today. His name is Vinny O Brien. And if you're not following him on LinkedIn, click a follow. I'll have his link underneath here and subscribe to his newsletter, which is absolutely fantastic. Vinny gives a lot of free information. He is a knowledge base when it comes to the e-commerce strategy side of things. He's one of the head rethink retail experts. So definitely check him out. I've been following and watching Vinny for a while. I got to know him through someone else. And today we're going to delve into the e-commerce world that I don't know a whole lot about. But I know that he has so much knowledge to share and a lot around online. And we're going to touch around, I suppose, the Irish market and how the online world, where are we at with that? What can we do to maybe pivot and get better at it? And Vinny's going to share some of his insights that he's seen globally and also nationally. Really happy to have you on, Vinny, and really appreciate your time this morning.
Thanks so much, Louise. Delighted to be here. I'm opinionated. That's one thing. So I'm sure we get something out of the conversation, and I appreciate the follow on LinkedIn. Yeah, look, I've been around for about 20 years in the industry, and there's things that have happened that have shocked me, and things that haven't surprised me, and there's a lot of cyclical things as well. And I've been lucky enough to have worked with multinational companies, work with global brands right now, and at the heart of all of that has been my Irish roots, and I have worked with a huge number of small Irish retailers. I live in Tralee and Kerry in the southwest, which is a market trading town by itself, and you realize how important it is to the center of communities. So I'm not someone who is online as it rules the world. I grew up working as a butcher in Kildare, so it was more of a retail approach that I suppose has kind of formed my career a little bit. So I'm not online as everything, and offline is not. So I'll hopefully bring a little bit of balance to the things I contribute today. There's so much change going on. It's overwhelming for people. So I'll try and give the opinion on certain things as well, and then maybe offer up maybe how the approach can be changed a little bit. So delighted to be here. Very grateful for you asking me on. Thank you.
Thanks, Vinny. Before we hit record, you touched on a big retailer called Amazon, okay? And I know this isn't on the questions we had initially, but I just thought it was really
Okay.
interesting your take on it, I suppose. And we've seen from the announcement that Amazon are indeed they're going to be here. It's going to be happening. The government announced it. It was all over social media. Twitter was going, it was blowing up with all the responses going through my with the Twitter the other day, and I seen it on LinkedIn. I reposted it. I see it as a huge opportunity, Vinny,
Mhm.
for Irish retailers. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on it because it can be very one way or the other. There's no in the middle. Either people are for it or people are really against it. So, what's your take on that?
Grab yourself a cup of tea, sit back and relax. I'm just going to free flow for about 20 minutes now. No, look, this is something I've been thinking about for a long time. I think it's a positive, first of all, and the positive is it's going to force change, and now we have an opportunity to think how we want to work with it. So I'll just give some context to the Irish e-com market and where I think it's at, and why we can think maybe reset our thinking on it. In 2011, I wrote a piece on a then blog site for Irish retail, and it was kind of along the ideas that e-commerce in Ireland doesn't work. And what I mean by doesn't work is it doesn't deliver profitability to everyone in the way that we think it will. When you think about the dynamics of it, Ireland is a reseller market predominantly, so product comes in here, and we have retailers that resell that product. In the automotive industry, actually, which I worked in with Mixed Garage, Ireland was known as Treasure Island because your job only was to get the product to Ireland. You've made your margin and don't care about it then, because that was the last port of call, and you could get so much margin. And it's kind of similar along that reseller market. And I think we kind of have to bear that in mind. Also, we don't have the depth of people to deliver e-commerce the way that we would like. So we're not all a major brand that we can afford to resource this in the ways we think we can. Therefore, there's restraints in cash flow, there's technology restraints, there's education and training restraints. So Ireland is not equipped right now for everyone to be an e-commerce retailer. And Where I think that really hit home was during the pandemic. As we emerged out of it, people went from doing loads of orders to doing very few, and they weren't really sure what to do with this thing. And when I think about Amazon coming in and what it could potentially offer, it's the idea that we can now actually use this one vehicle to be our e-commerce engine. It means that maybe you don't have to have your own brand store. Maybe you want to use Amazon to internationalize. If you're a growing brand and you want to get off the island, you can do those sorts of things. And the discussion right now, as you said, is really, really one-sided. And I can get a lot deeper on this, but I read a piece by Conor Pope yesterday that said the Irish consumer now needs to make a choice. Is it Amazon or Irish retail? And I think it's a really lazy quote, and it's an awful way to position this, because that's not really what this is about. This is fundamentally about business models that need to adapt and say, how do we utilize this huge machine? Like, is it fulfillment? Do we want to use their media network? Because they're launching Prime Video in Ireland. They started developing content for it last year. They will be asking Irish retailers to spend their advertising revenue to buy ad space off them. So in the context of all of that, I think that we've got this much more nuanced discussion to say, well, as a retail nation, how do we want to use it? What does it mean for us from a tech perspective? Does it make life easier? Does it make it more difficult? And what are the things we have to safeguard against? Because typically the stories you hear about Amazon eating our world are really misguided and come from a place of misunderstanding. And I'm happy to jump into any of that if you like. But I think what we've got to do is figure out how we work with it. And my final point just at this part of the discussion is to say they've done a 5-year deal with Unpost. The government announced this initiative. This is not something that's going to go away in 2 years if the economics don't work out for Amazon. They have deep pockets and they are here to stay. They employ 6,500 people in Ireland. That's going to multiply. They have about 300 or 400 vans on the road. They've tested same-day delivery. They can do next-day delivery anywhere in the country. These are all the things we're trying to do on our own websites anyway. Why not look to a world where we can make it easier? And I think the reason the lazy question has come out is because we now have to ask the question, is the business model of retail that we have existing in Ireland today correct for us? Do we get enough margin from it? Does it allow us to do the things we need to do? And I'm saying that from a retailer's perspective. So I think there's a lot in it. It's a very broad discussion, but I think there's a lot we can learn from it and use it to our advantage as well if we need to. And look, I've traded on the platform, so I have first-hand experience in dealing with it.
Do you think a lot of that, though, Vinny, what you're hearing and I suppose the kind of the knee-jerk reaction is the negativity, and that they're going to take away from these smaller local stores. Do you think a lot of that is because there's not an understanding of how their business model needs to be adapted into that market, that's kind of one of the key issues within that, is that there isn't an understanding of that?
But part of it, I think Amazon will definitely impact small retailers. They have such a wide assortment of products. They have incredibly low prices. And the article yesterday said that Irish retailers, for the most part, can compete in value. They can't. I firmly dispute that. That has not been true for a long time. I remember one Christmas, this is maybe 7 years ago, I was chatting to An Post, who delivered 19,000 parcels to Connemara in the month of December that were just coming from Amazon. So Amazon being part of our ecosystem and the sales challenge that people have to deal with is not something that is new to us. I think what's new is the dedicated website. So where people are going to feel the pinch is on advertising. So when you go look for a product in Google, if that's what you're doing, chances are you're going to see an Amazon ad before you see one of your own. But that's, again, it's not a new thing. Marketplaces spending, and from an advertising perspective, dominates Google and Facebook search. So we need to really think, well, what have we been doing for so long? Can we change it? And are there models that we can adopt to try and make it better for ourselves? I've spoken to people before about the Smooth company, a single product company who grew up on TikTok, used the fact that they didn't have a huge team to their advantage. They used their phone because that was the device that TikTok was running on, and they use it as their sole device for running the business. And they've grown that into a 7-figure business in the space of about 3 years without the need for other channels to be in play or the complication of other channels. And they've done a lot of organic growth. So there are there are demonstrable models out there now where we can get better, more profitable retail into the system if we understand how to utilize the technology, the systems themselves to work for us. Examples, again, I point to, white labeling, private labeling. Can you import a product and use it specifically for Amazon only? Like, it's an open market, so you can do loads and loads of research just by searching around and saying, well, what do I learn about my own products by just going to Amazon and searching? I think that's a really good starting point for people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You spoke when you were talking about Amazon there, you brought up retail media.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to quote something that you actually wrote about, and I thought it was interesting. What emerged for me during the Walmart earnings calls is that retail revenue alone will not get the scale or profits unless you're in the elite.
Mhm.
So how do we change the approach we take? For the majority, these ambitions need to be grounded in better retail, better in every facet. So I suppose I took that out because I just thought it was interesting for me reading that, because if I was a retailer reading that, I would be thinking, okay, how do I make those changes? I'm not a Tesco, okay? I'm not a massive multinational. I could be a franchise owner. I could own a Mesa Londis, a Super Value Eurospar. How could they adapt into that dynamic, I suppose, Vinny, or how, or do they not? Is it something that they could adapt and grow and scale the business?
It won't be for everyone.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's possible that everyone can get into that. And I'll just qualify the first part of that for
Mm,
myself, just for people who are listening, maybe to kind of describe the evolution of big box retail in the US. And I'm working in that market a lot now, so it's not something that's unfamiliar to me. But if I take Walmart as an example, and Amazon are a great example as well, their own retail margins are in small single digits. So they have a poor quarter that can, mean a margin that was 4% goes to 1%. On annualized turnover as big as they have, you probably get away with it. Now, if I translate that to when I worked in Arnott's, we made the only time we ever made money was between peak and January, because that was where the volume came. And you were hoping that the volume that you did during that period got you to a point where profitability was possible. So what we have in Ireland is a retail cycle that is predicated on the fact that profitability is not guaranteed, but profit is nice if we can get it from there. So that's the benchmark we're at. Walmart have layered in services. So they've layered in logistics, first of all. So you can now, as a third-party seller, use or Walmart logistics. So you pay them a fee. That's a very fast-growing part of their business. And Amazon have done the same. Walmart bought a TV company earlier this year called Vizio for $2.3 billion so that they can now put TVs into every household in the US, so they can sell more retail media spaces. And for anyone who's not familiar, retail media it's something that's gone on for a while, and it's what we do in e-commerce anyway. It's the purchase of an advertising spot, be it digital or physical. So, you're reading the independent newspaper and an ad pops up. That's an example of kind of a media network. That's just growing. So every connected device that we have, every addition into that channel. So even if you go into Spar or Londis now, you'll see little digital signage. They're retail media outlets now, and that whole space is evolving. So the reason that's so attractive is that margins in that space are north of 70% in certain cases. To give you kind of an idea of the growth, Amazon in their quarterly earnings 2 weeks ago, was it two? Yeah, it was about 2 weeks ago. They've taken retailer revenues away from the retailers. So to kind of give you some understanding, the AWS, which is the cloud service that they have, took 10 billion in revenue. Their advertising service took 11 billion in revenue. Their fulfillment network took a further 10 billion plus in terms of revenue over the course of their earnings period. So to contextualize that, Amazon spent in Q1 $9.6 billion in advertising. Now that seems like an enormous marketing, I should say, not just advertising. That seems enormous. But Amazon have taken in $11.8 billion in advertising revenue through their platform. And if you take in $11.8 billion at 70% margin, that's a far better position for you to be in than being a retailer struggling on between 1% and 4%, where you're kind of beholden to customers coming in and giving you the volume that you need. So that's what retailers have typically done. If you look around the networks, in the US, all the big players have done it. Tesco done it in the UK. Superdrug, Boots have done it. Dunnes are believed to be launching a retail media network this year as well. So the implication there is that if you're a small food producer and you want to get on the shelf in Dunnes, chances are you're going to be having a discussion about how much money you're spending on their media network for Q4 this year and beyond that. And that becomes the discussion. Then all of their displays in stores now become outlets that they can monetize as well and start getting advertising revenue. So to your question then about smaller retailers, how can they do better retail? Again, I think the only way the smaller guys can do it is to look at the business model. The business model itself is predicated again on having stock on shelf, stock in store, available all the time in the hope that someone comes in and buying it. Maybe, you know, and these aren't definitive answers, but models that are out there for us to try. Clogs in the UK did it. They took the Apple Store model where they made 30% of their inventory available in store. And then they had kiosks dotted around. They put it into the Bullring Shopping Centre when it reopened a number of years ago. 70% of their inventory was available in a warehouse that could do next day delivery. So even if you like something, you were able to go in and try it on, get coverage, get supportive people in store, and you knew that it was going to be at your house next day. That's the sort of thing that we now need to say, well, is the way that we've been doing business for years the right way to do it? And the final part of all of that is, you know, change is a constant. So the idea that we can stay the way we were, and you mentioned, you know, retailers not adopting online till COVID came around. So these aren't new revelations. These aren't things that are just emerging and kind of come down the tracks of us. These are things that have been around for a long time, and we've just point blank refused to try and get into them. I'm not saying it's easy, but if we're trying to build businesses that are going to be here for 20, 30 years, you've got to start figuring out ways to make it better. And I think that hard question is, you know, how many retailers today can put their hand on heart and say, we deliver profit, our model is good, we've a healthy adoption curve for new tech, we understand what our consumers want. And that's the part that I think we really fail on, is we need to think that there's a generation of consumers coming around that only work on mobile devices. They won't even use laptops. And that's what happened in China, and that's how the evolution of mobile and social shopping and everything became so strong, because they skipped laptops. They went straight to mobile and mobile devices. So now everything was done there. We're getting to that point. Like we will have a generation in the not very distant future that only know how to use mobile phones and don't really care about laptops. And that cuts out a layer of development and cost and other areas that are currently cited as really maybe high barriers for people trying to get online.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's really interesting, Vinny. I suppose another one I came across was the number of e-commerce sites showing customers alternative products when they're browsing. So this was significantly down. And you had written a piece on this, Vinny, which I thought was
Yeah.
interesting. And just to quote it, there is a 31 percent point decline from something that was at 72%. And that was a global elite retailers did in 2022. And it's gone to 41% in February 2023. So again, we're seeing a decline in retailers showing alternative products when they're browsing on e-commerce sites. So my question is, why is that? Is that, so that was 2022, 2023, we're seeing that. What was and I was really surprised to read that, because I would have thought the opposite until I read that. I would have thought that we would have been having more product on the site, maybe using a drop ship model or whatever. But that didn't seem to be the case. What do you think the reason was for that?
Can I set the scene in the newsletter? Because sometimes I just get like a thought in my head, and
Yeah, that's okay.
I just
That's
start writing. Like I kind of have to get it out
Can
there, and
elaborate, yeah.
for better or worse. And what happens then is all the other elements I know that I've been thinking about that story come into my head. So
Okay.
kind of just run with it. So that's just a contextual piece. But no, why did that happen? There's a couple of reasons. One is quite kind of a practical reason. I think a lot of people probably bundled all their product online very early in COVID and then realized, well, actually, there's only 10% of this is ever going to sell, so I'm going to cut the number of products I have. And the other side of it then is laziness. I think that with the newness of websites, and take something like Shopify as a very easy to start up a store and get products up there. And the novelty of it, I think initially is great for people. After time, it kind of wears off, and we forget that we've got to merchandise every single day. And it's one of those skills that I think that we need to focus on for the next few years. And I know in your field of training, maybe it's not on the merchandising side, but that retail art of getting up every day and saying, okay, well, I can see it's raining this morning. I'm going to bring the umbrellas to the front of the shop in the hope that I sell a few more of those. That's the sort of mentality that's been lost, and we've kind of been happy to let websites kind of become transient a little bit. We forget that we've got to get up and sweat it. It's an asset that we've got to work on every day and say, well, okay, how do we take the things that we do in the store and apply them to online? And like that's a full-time job I have with a client in the US, absolutely huge firm. They're spending quite amount of time using the merchandising side of things to develop their business. And just to kind of give you an example of what that means, we looked at all of the analytics that were around cross sales and bundles and average order value and those areas, and we decided there's something here to say that we can do it better, and it's not a automotive company. So we have a lot of information on the end user, which is the vehicle. We also know the person who owns it. So now we've got this really rich understanding of who that person and what that product is. So we can leverage that a little bit to make better merchandising opportunities for people. And that's kind of what we started doing. And we started small. We started testing out the idea of, the top left first row of an in-store search where someone is looking for a particular product. We know that that's the best converting slot on the page. So if we put in something that's maybe a little left of center up there, and we wanted to sell something different, or we wanted to push a manager special or something that's high margin, do we get the same impact? So we've been working this process since September last year. And one of the major outputs of it was the page design was really, really poor. So we were able to actually go away and isolate, and this company has 16 websites and a huge amount of product. But we were able to isolate this particular test to say, well, actually, we know different parts of the page convert better. We also know during the customer journey of getting from A to B to C is not a simple process. We made it really difficult for them. So let's simplify all of that. And also our trading team are saying to us, guys, you have seasonal product out there that is just not selling. What are you doing to push it for us? And then our manager's saying to us, we've got discounted product here that's not moving either. How the hell are we going to do it? So with all these variables, so we spent time redesigning what we call now a product experience page to say, well, actually, with people with this brand, let's drive them here, knowing that we've now got 10 elements that we could come in on any given morning and say, okay, I want to change this because reason A, B, or C. So since we put that in place at the beginning of, I think it was just the end of March, beginning of April, the conversion rate has gone up 2.5 times from what it was. So it's gone from about a 2.5% converting page to in itself, it's over 6% now, just by making those changes. And the other thing it's done for people, and I know you're into the people side of it, Louise, is it's now empowering people who were never trained in the skill of e-commerce merchandising to apply their retail knowledge. They have a tech capability that can allow them to make those changes. And it means that when it comes to looking at targets and saying, God, I don't think that's realistic. Now they're saying, well, actually, we have 10 things we can do now that we couldn't do in September that allow us to effect change. And by the way, we can do that across 15 other sites if we want. And, it's that domino effect of now something's in train. How do you keep that moving? But it's the team that are empowered to do it, I think, is the important part.
Yeah. And I think listening to what you said there, and from my own shopper experience, when that site isn't, as you say, easy to navigate, the shopper is just disengaged and you lose them. Because if I look at myself, I was on, for example, shopping on the Zara website, and this is something small, but I think it's so important. When I went into my basket, I wanted to go back into the exact point where I'd stopped looking through about a million dresses, and it brings me back to the top of the page again. So that annoyed me because I had to scroll all the way down, right? When I went to the next website, next clothing, it brought me exactly back to that blue dress that I was at, which was in nearly the end of the page. Yeah. And it sounds quite silly, right? But for someone that is so time conscious, having to do an extra step or work for it in any way just puts you off as a shopper. So I went and bought it next because it was actually easier than to
Yeah.
have to navigate when I wanted to go in and look at it and widen the scope of the picture. And then it was bringing me back again to the very, so it was just wasn't making that part easy for me. And it's interesting you say that because these are big, big brands that still don't have it right. You know what I mean? And then I go into some websites and a local website, a local boutique that's actually here in Ireland. And I'd say 70% of the stock on it was sold out.
Wow.
Um, so there's very little options to choose from.
And were they still there to browse through?
They were all there, yeah, and they were all sold out. So and I've spoken to a couple of retailers and I've said, with your online store, and they said it's a bit of a chore, Louise, because we have to go and we have to upload the SKUs
Manual.
onto the online platform. But going back to what you said there needs to be a big shift to mentality around our front of shop, right? And inside our store should be the exact same experience when you go onto our website. You should get that same level of detail and put that same effort in, as you said there. And if they're not, and if it's done, I'm just going to do it and throw it out and not bother with it, then I would question why they're doing it at all, to be completely honest with you. Because if anything, it's diminishing the brand, because it's two different experiences you're getting with it.
Completely. And
Mm.
that's probably why you see so many disjointed, well, not probably, it is why you see so many disjointed products. People think, well, I'll build a store and people will come and they'll buy from me and that's all I have to do. But you've got to work really hard at it and you've got to train someone to be probably the biggest skill gap from a commerce perspective, at least here, is this idea of someone trading the website for you. So someone coming in every day and sweating it and saying, what's the weather doing? What's going on in social media? What TV shows ran last night? How do I contextually make myself relevant, and what products do we have to allow us to talk about those topics? And you need to have a kind of a natural curiosity about the health of your business or the products that you're kind of showcasing to people and saying, well, and to the point that you made, it's from the consumer perspective. And too often, I think we build our work activity around things that we need to get done ourselves because they're part of our internal workload. But actually, if you stop and say, well, if I'm shopping my own site, how easy is it to do the things that I'm expecting someone to do, even for email sign up or some of those areas that are there. So you need to spend as much time. And as you said, the love that you give to your store has got to go into your website as well. And where we've got to start improving, and you kind of asked that question of me earlier on, we need to look to automation. So that stock out situation is avoidable. Now, it might require the investment of syncing a point of sale to a Shopify store or something like that, but it is investment in time and effort that is time well spent. Because if it was for your store, you would do it. You would not say, well, I'm going to put it off. You just would say, okay, well, I just have to get it done. I'll suck it up. I'll move along with it. Why do we not apply the same mentality? Being able to do something like that, and if I give a kind of a simple example in the Amazon world, once you're into that network, it opens up a lot of different possibilities. And I'll reverse flow this for a second. The morning Amazon announced this to their private brands about a month ago that this is happening, one of the brands I work with, they are large, so they got notified quite early. They were able to take 3 clicks on their mobile phone from their Amazon UK and Amazon Germany store to enable all of their Irish stock and all their Irish products into an Irish store. It took less than 10 seconds to have fulfilled all of the technical requirements you need to be able to be visible on the Irish platform that's going to be launching in Q1. So by getting your setup right in the first instance, you now have all this opportunity. And similarly, when I was in Mixed Garage, when we launched on the UK, we had 1.1 million products. So that's 1.1 million barcodes going through the system. And it told us in our Amazon account, we actually have translations for 450,000 of your products in Germany. Would you like to list them now? And our only decisions then were, legally, can we do it? What customer service we need to have for this? There's a few other minor discussion points that we had to have, but technically, once we hit the go button, we had listings available in Germany within an hour of hitting that button. So our capacity to grow all of a sudden got really different. And that was because we had the basics done really, really well. We had inventory availability being made available in real time all of the time. That might not work for everyone, but once a day updating your inventory you might get away with it. And we just got to strive to be better at these things, and that's a mindset shift. We talked a little bit about it before we got on the call, but the culture and mindset to technology and e-commerce has got to change dramatically, I think, in order for us to put together a framework for saying, how do we do good, bad, or indifferent? Because there is no collective thinking around it. And as I said, profitability is really difficult to get from an Irish perspective. Amazon now provides an opportunity for people to look at those areas to say, well, rather than us going down that glib consumer question, how can we make ourselves better by living amongst that Amazon world? And that's the kind of area that I think is going to be interesting.
Yeah, I think and what stood out to me, I think, as you were describing the e-com, I suppose, and the in-store experience and the bricks and mortar, is that we have a store manager in a store, and we've an assistant manager, and we've colleagues and all of that. So the mindset shift to me would be that, who is that store manager managing your website? Who is managing do we look at it? We need to nearly start looking at it like a second site, a virtual second site store, as opposed to, we're just going to put it there, and if anyone can't get what we want, you're just going to push them over to buy it there. I think that has been what has been the case for most retailers, has been, oh, go on to the online store, or it's nearly a landing page. That's what it's seen as, is that, oh, we're here, so they'll find us on the online world, but we're not utilizing that in the same way and driving the KPIs as we would in a business in real time. Last question before we go, Vinny, and it's around, do you think physical stores are going to be here in the next 5 years?
Yes, I do, and I hope so. I would love to see them evolve a little bit. Like I said, I live in Tralee, which it needs that town center. It's more important than just shopping. It's where people congregate to get news from each other. It's where they go to get counseling from each other, and all the things that make us human. So I really hope they are. I hope they evolve. I hope that they understand that consumer requirements are shifting, and maybe think of yourself in the non-work mode and say, how do I apply that kind of thinking to what goes on what goes on in our store? And maybe not to be afraid of technology, because you've been to the big trade shows. 5% of what's there is relevant and 95% is not. You've got to work out what are the things that are going to help you out in your store, help out your employees, and say, well, be really critical and say, is this right for us? And then I think you can start making sensible decisions about investment. We're in this lucky position as well in Ireland, where the government have invested in grants to help digitize businesses. I believe there's another one of those grants going to launch again this year. Really critically evaluate, beyond a website, what are the things that you should be looking at to improve that store experience. And my final point in all this, and you being in training, I'd love you to kind of give an opinion or to take it with you, is that the language of retail needs to change, and language of e-commerce. So we need to look at new roles with new definitions to make that culture shift possible. And customer experience is one of those areas that everyone should have someone that's assigned to customer experience. And under that is how you make customer journeys easier, regardless of the location or where they originate. I think if we had someone like that in place in our businesses, we would get great feedback, we'd solve problems, we'd be innovative, we'd be agile, we'd be happier, and so would our consumers. So I'd love to see that we start seeing more customer experience managers and executives and people popping up to make the overall culture of retail evolve a little bit. But hopefully there's something in there for you.
Yeah, there is. I think that's brilliant to end it on, because I think from working in stores, it was, the online is a silo to the physical store. And I've worked in Next, Woody's, all of those, and they were very much never, we talked about omni-channel, but when you look at it from the ground level, from the frontline teams, they didn't see it as that connected piece that you speak about. So I think bridging that gap and having people work together, that this is actually my other store, we're working in cohesive way and we're creating that same experience. Whether you go online or whether you walk into the store, you're made feel that you're appreciated and you're welcome, and you get that same level of service, of product knowledge
Yeah.
across the board. So I think that's a really good one to end on. Thank you, Vinny, for your time. I appreciate it so much.
Likewise.
Um,
Thank you very much.
thank you so much for coming on. We've literally flown through the show.
Yes. Sorry.
So it's been really, really good. The recordings are here. They're going to be on Spotify, they're going to be on Apple, they're going to be on Google, all of those kind of good ones. So check it out. And again, give Vinny a follow. He has so much more knowledge. You've only like scratched the surface here today with them. So you'll definitely love some of his bits that he writes about. And it's really, really topical and interesting.